Terminator is an immensely successful American science fiction franchise that chronicles the story of futuristic robotic killers sent through time to murder various individuals who are fated to save humanity from these very machines. While the franchise started with a low-budget indie horror movie, Terminator has gone on to become a cultural staple and one of the most profitable intellectual properties on the planet. With the success of the franchise, many sequels were made, and while the first two seem to be celebrated, many fans and casual viewers seem to be disillusioned by most of the recent entries in the series. Totaling at 6 movies, 1 television show, several video games, 2 novelizations, and many comics, the Terminator franchise sits at an interesting place. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my recent obsession, and I'm going to go over my feelings on the sequels and why I actually like these movies.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another Carrot Scraps video, and by another, I mean the 89th. So yeah, after some recent rewatches of Terminator, I've found that I'm extremely obsessed with the franchise. I've just been watching all 6 movies on repeat for the past 2 months or so. I watch 1 through 6 and then I just start over again, and I just do that on repeat. In between doing pretty much anything, I'll be on my phone just watching any of the Terminator movies in between editing or writing or moving. Which reminds me, I moved into my new place. I gotta be honest, it's a little weird to be away from my hometown for the first time in my life, but this place is awesome for a couple of reasons, honestly. The first one being where we are right now. This is the bunker. That's my name I'm giving to this location. And you can see why it's wonderful. There's all this cool stuff. So that's part 1. Reason number 2 is that I don't live with Kyle anymore. Kyle was my cousin who I lived with for some time. You heard him on the channel multiple times, and I gotta be honest, he was just really frustrating. You know, I love family and everything, but it was tough to get videos done with Kyle always in the room. And for those 2 reasons and so many more, I'm just so excited to be in my new place. But anyway, let's stop talking about myself and focus back in on Terminator. So even though I love the Terminator movies and I love the Terminator sequels, I'm sure I don't need to tell you that they're not the most popular when it comes to public reception. I mean, generally speaking, people really don't like the Terminator sequels after the 2nd movie. But like I said, I love the sequels for various reasons, and today I'm going to go over some of the reasons why I like them. Quick disclaimer before I jump right into that. I know these movies are old, but I kind of want to avoid spoilers as best as I can. I think a lot of these movies can be really great when you don't know the twists going into them, especially for a lot of the people who are on the fence about watching the sequels. I will be giving a brief synopsis for each of the sequels, but I'm going to try and keep spoiler information to a minimum. But obviously it's going to be difficult for me to not spoil most of the key details, so keep that in mind. Anyway, let's stop wasting time and start talking about Terminator movies. Before we talk about why I like the Terminator sequels, I wanted to go over some of the more common criticisms about the sequels and the Terminator franchise in general. Keep in mind that I'm not telling anybody that they're wrong if they resonate with some of these criticisms. In fact, I agree with a lot of them myself. I'm just explaining why they're not necessarily important to me or why I don't think that they're true. But again, that shouldn't reflect on anybody else but myself. Anyway, I think the biggest criticism I see about the Terminator franchise in general is that it's repetitive. Either the same events occur frequently, or the sequels can't stop referencing previous films. First of all, I do agree that while it's fun to reference certain media, there shouldn't be such a heavy reliance on what came before. It's fun to make references, and the audience often likes to notice those references. But watching media that's almost entirely references isn't always the most fun in my opinion. That being said, when it comes to the discussion of repetition in Terminator, I think repetition has a lot to do with the story being told. It's not necessarily some accident or pitfall. I think for this particular story about time travel, that repetition is somewhat important. A lot of the films after T2, and even including Terminator 2, follow a very familiar series of events, and that series of events is derived from what came before. Now, in its defense, I would say that that's part of the ongoing story of Terminator. The movies are actively about time travel, changing fate, and expecting certain events to happen with the intention of changing them. While I could see why some people would see this repetition as lazy writers unable to tell new stories, I see the repetition between all 6 films as a form of storytelling that represents the fictional science of time travel. In essence, a lot of these films are repetitive because the act of going back in time
is repetitive. Another criticism I've seen about the Terminator sequels is that after Terminator 2, there's nowhere the franchise can go. Now, I'm sure most people disagree with this criticism, even if you do dislike the Terminator franchise, but I've still seen a lot of people share this sentiment. Now, in short, my response to this is I don't generally like making absolute statements if I can avoid it. And so while I do think that there are some stories that should stay a finite number of chapters, I don't think that can necessarily be said about the majority of stories. I think this mindset comes from the fact that I'm a superhero comic book fan, and being such, the majority of my reading material is an endless number of sequels, essentially. So in my opinion, it's not that the story is finished after Terminator 2, I just think it's more likely that it's more difficult to write a sequel after that point, which means that it's not impossible to write a sequel, it just takes a creative or talented writer to pen a story that is good enough to continue the saga and to excite fans of the franchise. The last criticism that I wanted to talk about is that because there are so many Terminator sequels that have taken the established canon in so many different directions, it's hard to salvage what's left. Essentially, at this point, a lot of people feel as if the story is too much of a mess to do anything with. The thing is, I think that when you have an ongoing canon, like in a film franchise with a number of sequels, superhero comics, or shonen manga, I'd argue that salvaging the franchise while keeping the canon intact is a big part of the appeal of that medium. As I mentioned earlier, it just takes a creative or talented writer. I don't think any franchise or story is ever too far gone. But putting that aside, while it might appear on the surface that the Terminator movies are too much of a mess to comprehend, I would argue that once you take a deep dive into the films, they don't contradict each other as much as people would think. The few contradictions that do exist in the Terminator sequels can be explained given the science fiction logic presented in the films. The best example of this is how often Judgment Day, the name given to the first day of the apocalypse, changes its calendar date throughout the Terminator movies. The original year of Judgment Day was 1997, then the date was moved to 2003, and then to 2017. I think the films make it clear that because we're dealing with time travel, everything is subject to change. And so I think that means that continuity errors can be explained away more easily. In addition, I think that also means that you can change the direction of the franchise at any given time. Anyway, long story short, I don't think that the continued canon of the 6 movies is too convoluted to salvage. In fact, I think it makes sense for the most part given the logic presented in the movies. Anyway, those are just a handful of criticisms that I feel I've heard a lot when people are discussing the Terminator sequels. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the Terminator sequels, what happens in the movies, and why I happen to like them. The original Terminator was the directorial debut of James Cameron, who would go on to direct Hollywood blockbusters like Titanic, Avatar, and of course, Terminator 2. The story of the original Terminator follows Sarah Connor, who is a young woman working paycheck to paycheck, whose life is turned upside down when a cyborg sent from the future attempts to take her life. The cyborg is later identified as the T-800 Terminator, a robot made specifically for one purpose: to kill its target. The reason this Terminator is searching for Sarah is because in the future her son John Connor will lead the revolution and overthrow the reign of machines. The Terminator wasn't the only one sent back in time though. At the same time, Kyle Reese arrives to protect Sarah Connor from the Terminator. Kyle and Sarah eventually fall in love with one another before the untimely death of Kyle. However, as fate would have it, before death, John Connor would be conceived. And those events would essentially solidify the rest of the Terminator franchise. The first Terminator film is really awesome for a lot of reasons. The main one that I'm going to focus on is that it's a science fiction horror film in a franchise that is predominantly an action series. I mean, if the Terminator wasn't as successful and popular as it is today, if you watch this movie in isolation, this unstoppable killer cyborg is really disturbing. And the film does a lot to build him up as a horrific threat. In fact, Halloween is one of my favorite films ever made, and when I was rewatching Terminator, I got a lot of Michael Myers vibes. And I was really pleased to find that the director of Terminator was heavily influenced by John Carpenter's Halloween. I just think it's really cool that that's what they were going for, and it's exactly what I saw in the movie. But I also really love how much they did with such a small budget, and I really love the visual effects in the film. Though some of the effects are dated by today's standards, you can't deny how impressive they are. And of course, it goes without saying that all of this science fiction lore, and all of this storytelling, and all of this design work is absolutely iconic and genius. I mean, the future war between man and machines, the design of the endoskeleton, the Terminator itself, and just the concept of machines going back in time to stop the future resistance, all of it is so cool, and it was cool enough to start an entire franchise.
So if I was going to give you one reason why I love the first Terminator film, it would be because it's a science fiction horror film. And I think that's really cool and really unique when compared to the other sequels. Now let's move on and talk about Terminator 2: Judgment Day.
Terminator 2 takes place in 1991, years after John Connor is born. Two Terminators arrive from the future, with one's mission to murder John and the other's mission to protect him. Throughout the film, we learn more details about the war between man and machine and how the conflict begins. Skynet is a computer program that becomes self-aware after being turned on, and in its attempt to protect humanity, decides to destroy it since humanity is the greatest threat to itself and to Skynet. The rest of the movie is Sarah, John, and their new Terminator ally trying to stop Judgment Day by changing the present while avoiding the deadly attacks of the Terminator sent to kill them. Now, it's hard for me to illustrate this without being hyperbolic, but Terminator 2 it's one of the best films I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, like, when I rewatched this movie recently, my jaw was on the floor the entire time. And at this point, I've rewatched the movie multiple times, and every time I'm still impressed. I'm just kind of shell-shocked by how fantastic the film actually is. And in fact, it might be one of the best sequels I've ever seen. What makes it so good? Well, a lot of different things. First of all, I think it's a really great sequel because it doesn't just do what the first movie did. It really attempts to pave its own path and to do little twists that trick the audience who are familiar with the first film. But again, while being referential to the first film, it still stands on its own. It's also such an interesting transition from a horror film like the first Terminator to an action movie, which is the second Terminator. And then of course, the visual effects are so fantastic that they stand up to this day. I think the greatest strength of Terminator 2 is something that it shares in common with the Evil Dead films. At no point during the second Terminator do I feel bored at all. I'm always curious and fascinated, and I'm always excited and on the edge of my seat. And that's after repeat viewings of the movie. I think a lot of that comes with just really good maintenance on the pacing of the film. The objectives of the characters and what's happening in the film changes pretty regularly, and the scenery, visuals, and palette changes pretty regularly as well. I feel like some films risk overwhelming their audience with that kind of stuff, but I think Terminator 2 is the kind of fast-paced action movie that keeps you entertained by doing that. It doesn't move along too quickly, but just as you're feeling a little too comfortable, it moves you into a completely different phase of the movie. Another thing I love about Terminator 2 is that it's an extremely efficient film in my opinion. Efficiency is something that I really admire when it comes to filmmaking. For an idea of what I mean when I talk about efficiency in filmmaking, I look to a movie like Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. That movie is a film where it feels as if every decision made in the filmmaking has a purpose. Every line of dialogue, every event, and every performance is important. Whereas sometimes there are other films where you're left wondering why a certain line of dialogue was left in the film. So efficiency is something that I really admire about filmmaking, and I think it's something that Harry Potter 3 and Terminator 2 share. There are so many little details in Terminator 2 that feel superfluous, but when you rewatch the movie multiple times, you realize that all of the events are put there for a reason. Even something as small as someone teaching you how to give the thumbs up in the background of a shot, or learning where to find a pair of keys in somebody's car. It really does feel like everything in Terminator 2 is important, and I really like that efficiency. So if I was gonna pick like my favorite thing about Terminator 2, I don't know. I really can't. Other than just I love the movie. It's my favorite of all the Terminator movies. So I guess that's my favorite thing about it is that it's potentially the best Terminator film in my opinion. I don't know. I just really love this film. It's astounding. But let's get on to the real stuff. We all know that Terminator 1 and 2 are fantastic films. They're the two most popular films in the franchise. Let's get on to the controversial takes. Because while I think Terminator 2 is one of the best films ever made, and while I absolutely love Terminator 1, I actually really love the sequels as well, for various different reasons. So let's get into Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. In Terminator 3, the machines learned that while John and Sarah were able to stop Judgment Day in the previous film, they weren't able to stop it permanently. Another Terminator is sent back in time to protect John Connor and his future wife from a Terminator who is on a mission to kill as many important individuals in the Resistance as possible. The reason this is done is because John has lived off the grid for years now, so he can't be discovered. And since a paper trail couldn't be found for John in the future, Skynet had to do the next best thing. And so they decided to kill all of those closest to him. And continuing the tradition from Terminator 2, we get a new Terminator in this film that's more sophisticated than Arnold's model. Over the course of the film, John learns that Judgment Day is inevitable, and that even though individuals in the past can prevent the upcoming Judgment Day in the future, they wouldn't stop it permanently, and Judgment Day would just be moved to another date. And so the movie ends with Skynet being released onto the world and nuclear war beginning. Terminator 3 is awful, but in the best possible way in my opinion. Technically speaking, I think it might be the worst film in the franchise. And when I'm speaking technically, I'm talking about the way the film is made. Writing, acting, visual effects, basically everything you'd learn in film school. That being said, the film is insanely entertaining. It's hilarious, it's fun, it's memorable. It may not be a film that features technical quality, but it's the kind of bad that's incredibly entertaining, and I really appreciate it for that. Now don't get me wrong, I do still think that there's cool stuff to this movie. I like a lot of the action scenes, especially because they're still using practical effects at this point. I like the robotic design of the TX, although I wish we saw more of it in the film. And I like seeing some of the origins of the Terminators and Skynet. Seeing the original clunky but deadly Terminator is actually really cool. So yeah, I do like a lot of this movie unironically, but there's no denying how ridiculous and over the top some of the other parts of this movie are. But they're all ridiculous and over the top in the best possible way. You're just shouting and laughing and having a blast while watching. Even if you don't watch any of the other Terminator movies, I highly recommend you watch this one with friends. Play a drinking game with it, have some fun. I love Terminator 3.
So if I was gonna say like my favorite thing about Terminator 3 or like the reason why I enjoy it as a movie, it would be the kind of so bad it's good factor. It really is a silly and ridiculous movie. There are some things about it that are really cool, like the visual effects and some of the lore, but generally speaking, it is so bad that it's good, and at least it's not boring. So that's what I love about Terminator 3. Anyway, let's talk about Terminator 4. What? Do you hear that?
Carrot, you can't move here.
What do you mean I can't move here? I already have. How did you get in here? Who are you?
You already have. Apples. I might be too late. Look, I'm you from the future. They call me Carrot Slurps.
But why do they call you Carrot Slurps?
I don't have time to explain such obvious things, Carrot Boy. I've come from the year 2077, because my life has been awful since you made the decision to move in 2022.
Wait a second, my life is ruined that far in the future because I decided to move in 2022? I'm sorry, this isn't making any sense to me. Also, you look way too young to be me from the future, especially that far in the future. It just, like none of this is adding up.
Ha! Like this science fiction garbage you're obsessed with makes any sense.
Whoa, why are you being so rude? And I'm sorry, you're me from the future, but am I supposed to believe that you don't like Terminator anymore?
Of course not! Especially after those awful sequels. You couldn't pay me to watch that fish trash.
Fish? Dude, you broke into my house, and now you're being incredibly rude about something that I really love. Like what's going on here?
Yeah, well, sorry about that. I've got an upset stomach from commuting to the past. You got any Pepto?
Wait, hold on. Let's say that I do believe your story. You are planning on going back to your timeline now, right? I mean, you gave me your warning. You told me not to move. Message received. You can leave now, right?
Oh, no. It's a one-way trip. You're stuck with me for a while, kid.
I'm stuck with you? I'm sorry. I don't know why that's my responsibility. Plus, where are you going to stay? I don't have any room. There's, I have comics everywhere.
I see a couch over there, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that couch? But you can't use that. You can't use that couch because I use that for sitting all the time. I need that.
Good, thanks.
Good to meet you. Yeah, you just sit there. It's all yours. It's all you. Anyway, what were we talking about? Terminator or something?
Terminator Salvation is one of the more different entries in the sequels. It takes place after Judgment Day in the fictional future of 2018, after the war between humans and machines has already been going on for well over a decade. The story follows a jaded and aggressive John Connor before he becomes leader of the Resistance. In addition, in this movie we learn new details about early Terminator models and the origins of Terminators that look human who are meant to infiltrate the human societies. On the other hand, Terminator Salvation might also be the worst of the Terminator sequels, but for the opposite reason. Technically speaking, it's a really well-made film. It has some pretty interesting story concepts, it has some cool visual effects, and I even like a lot of the acting. But unfortunately, it can be a little dull sometimes. From the color palette chosen in the cinematography, to the performances and the events of the movie, sometimes it just kind of drags. But I will say that the more that I've watched this film, the more I've come to appreciate it. I think it just depends on the type of viewer if it's going to be entertaining or not. Entertainment is something that Terminator 2 achieved effortlessly, but I feel like Terminator Salvation struggles with a lot of its audience members. Again, I don't think it's an awful film, I just think it's a little slow sometimes, and it misses a lot of the fun, tongue-in-cheek stuff that the other Terminator films have. Stuff like I'll Be Back is fun because the movie isn't taking itself that seriously, and I feel like Terminator Salvation takes itself very seriously. One of the things that makes Terminator Salvation unique when compared to the other movies is the fact that it's not about avoiding a future apocalypse. In Salvation, the apocalypse happened, and now we follow the story of people who are living after that. I mean, getting the story is really significant. Most of the Terminator movies are talking about this time period happening, and so it's cool to get a story during this time. In fact, I would argue that this time period is some of the more iconic parts of the Terminator franchise. After Terminator 2, a lot of the video games took place during this timeline, even though in the first two movies, you barely got to see the future timeline at all. I think setting Terminator 4 during this time was a really cool choice for the franchise, and I think this decision helps the movie stand out amongst the other 6 films. In addition, while I love that the Terminator franchise deals with time travel so much, I do appreciate that Salvation doesn't at all. It's the only Terminator movie that isn't about time travel. And again, I love time travel in Terminator, but it's nice to get this chapter that doesn't feature something so prominent in the rest of the franchise. I feel like Terminator Salvation is the definition of a combo breaker.
So if I was gonna say one thing that I love about Terminator Salvation, or my favorite thing about the movie, I'd say that I like that it's so different. I like that it tried something new when compared to the other entries in the franchise. Even if it didn't do that new thing perfectly, I appreciate that it's so different. Especially where it's placed with the other Terminator sequels, it's a nice break before you get to more similar films after that. Anyway, let's talk about Terminator Genisys.
Now, the 5th Terminator film, or Terminator Genisys, is where the sequels start to change a little bit. I'm pretty sure in Terminator 5 and 6, you're meant to assume that Terminator 3 and 4 are to be ignored. However, I like to pretend that they're still canon, and I'll explain why. Terminator Genisys largely tells the story of an understood timeline of events being changed. The entire narrative plays on what viewers and characters in the film believe to be concrete within the timeline, and a lot of the suspense and a lot of the twists are built upon twisting what you know. And so I like to think that Terminator 3 and 4 are canon until the events of this movie. And since the timeline is altered so much in Terminator Genisys, it essentially alters the timeline in the past. So essentially, it's not that a studio executive retconned 3 and 4, it's that the events of the story retconned 3 and 4, if that makes sense. Anyway, the story follows Kyle Reese, Sarah Connor, and John Connor, but in a different way. Like I mentioned earlier, Genisys explores the ideas of pre-established timelines not being as concrete as you believe. The general plot is simple enough, choosing to follow the plot of previous Terminator films. Skynet threatens the future of humanity with Judgment Day and has discovered a new way to achieve its goals. And in response, a number of individuals try desperately to stop Judgment Day from coming once again. All 3 characters, Sarah, John, and Kyle, throughout the events of the film, learn about how their destiny is different, challenge their prophesized fate, or pave a new path forward. And those are the general events of Terminator Genisys. Terminator Genisys definitely isn't perfect, and it makes some decisions in terms of story events that I'm not the biggest fan of, but overall, I think it's really fun. It's character-driven, it's exciting, and it's incredibly entertaining. Maybe it references the old movies a little bit too much, and maybe it'll upset Terminator lore fans, but I think this movie does a great job at entertaining its audience. Plus, the plot is about resetting the timeline, which goes a long way for making the future installments canon, and my stupid brain that wants things to be canon is happy. I think the idea of using time travel to break the timelines and essentially reset a bunch of events is a really smart idea for this film. It makes it easier for other stories to be canon, and it makes it easier to make sequels in the future. Something else that I think is really unique about this movie is that you get to see the romance between Kyle and Sarah blossom more closely. I'm not gonna say that these actors are incredible at portraying these characters, but I think it's nice that they tried to create some chemistry between these two. As much as I love the first Terminator film, the romance between Kyle and Sarah wasn't necessarily sold the best. And that's because it's not a romantic comedy, right? But it is an important part of the story and the mythology, and I would have liked to have seen it developed a little bit better in that film. And Terminator Genisys gives us a closer look at what that romance could have been and why these characters like each other. Another thing I love about Terminator Genisys is that this film continues the character arc of the Arnold Terminator from Terminator 2. Now keep in mind, these are 2 different characters portrayed by the same actor, but what I'm trying to say is that the spirit of the the character arc from Terminator 2 is carried on in Terminator Genesis and then into Dark Fate, again with a different character, all 3 different characters. I think starting in Terminator Genesis and continuing into Dark Fate, we see some dramatic characterization from the Arnold Terminator that I think is building off of what was started in Terminator 2. And I really appreciate that because it gives us some strong character moments and it ties into the overall themes of the franchise really well. But like I said, it's a fun and entertaining film, it does some new things, and that's a win in my book.
So if I was going to say my favorite thing about Terminator Genesis, or just kind of pick something that I love about the movie, I would say that I like the retcons in the film when it comes to time travel, because it allows for a little bit more wiggle room and creativity when it comes to the other parts of the franchise. Anyway, let's talk about the most recent Terminator film, Terminator Dark Fate.
As of recording this video, Terminator 6, aka Terminator Dark Fate, is the last film in the franchise. Once again, it plays on what audience members expect of the Terminator films, revisiting previous plot points from earlier films and drastically changing established events. A woman named Dani Ramos is being hunted by a new Terminator sent from the future to prevent the human resistance from overthrowing the machine armies. And an individual named Grace is sent back in time to protect her in a similar way that Sarah was protected by Kyle in the first film. But again, this new protector is different than you might expect. The film also explores a grieving and elderly Sarah Connor who must live with the reality that her son has died. In this timeline, John Connor was murdered by a Terminator shortly after the events of T2. She now roams from place to place, hunting down Terminators sent from the future before they can do anything. And after that, the rest of the movie is really simple. It's just run from the Terminator. It's not even Prevent Judgment Day like a lot of the other Terminator films are. This movie is just run away from the Terminator. And of course, we get to learn a thing or two about each of the characters along the way. Terminator Dark Fate is the second best sequel in the franchise, in my opinion. I mean, this movie is the Ferrari of sequels, and I don't even know what that means. I mean, I barely know what a Ferrari is. In fact, I don't know what a Ferrari is. I don't know what a Ferrari looks like, but this is it. It has a lot of interesting ideas, it has some really fun characters, and best of all, the action is over the top and insanely memorable. I feel like this is the closest that I'll ever get to watching live action anime. I just get that feeling the entire time I'm watching the fight scenes in this movie, and believe me, that's a huge compliment. Obviously, I want characters to be grounded when it comes to an action scene. But to some extent, I also don't want things to be too grounded. I mean, look, I like comics and science fiction because I want to see things I could never see in real life. And I really appreciate it when other media embraces that philosophy. And I think Terminator Dark Fate definitely delivers on that unrealistic scale 1000%. I mean, seriously, the fight scenes in this movie are like all hype. I couldn't let go of my face while I was watching it for the first time, and even the second time, it's just, it's so exciting. There's a lot of cool stuff when it comes to the story and the characters in Dark Fate, but the best thing about the movie is the action. I mean, it's the chain. There's like a chain. There's a scene with the chain. And she's throwing the chain, and there's a symbiote Terminator and guns. Just watch Terminator Dark Fate, please. I love this movie so much. I love watching it. My socks have to be surgically removed from me because they're blown off. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not making any sense. I want to go watch Terminator. Now, something else that I love about Terminator Dark Fate is the choice in protagonists that share the screen. I think Dark Fate has a really strong cast of protagonists that each serve a purpose in an interesting way. One of my favorite observations about Dark Fate is that the 3 human protagonists each represent Sarah Connor at a different moment in her life, including the, actual Sarah Connor. I think that's a really insightful observation, and it's one that I think is really important to the film, and I could definitely see how that could be an intentional choice from the creative team. We get Dani, who represents Sarah in the first Terminator film, before she was pulled into the world of cyborgs and time travel. We get Grace, who represents the paranoid and agitated Sarah from Terminator 2, and then of course we get Sarah, who at this point is a very different version of herself than we've seen previously. A jaded and violent hunter who's lost hope. I really hope this was an intentional decision from the people who made the movie because it's such a cool idea to explore.
Alright, so if I was going to pick one thing that I love about Terminator Dark Fate and something that kind of makes me enjoy the movie, it would be the action. I think the action is so over the top in such a unique way, in a way that I've never really seen in a live action American film before, and I really appreciate that. I've never felt so overwhelmed by an action scene. Again, the best way I can put it is it feels the closest to watching live action anime. That's such a compliment, so definitely the action in Terminator Dark Fate is worth that movie alone, Anyway, those are the Terminator movies. Those are all my thoughts on the Terminator movies. And even though I love all of those films, I still do have thoughts on what I'd like to see in a future Terminator film and things I'd like to see changed to potentially make a better film in the future. So let's talk about that.
Anyway, all of that being said, let's talk about what I would like to see more of in the future. My first answer to that is variety. Even though I like the repetitive nature of the narrative between all 6 movies, I definitely would like to see more variety from the next entry. It doesn't even need to be story variety. It can be variety in location and scenery. Imagine a Terminator movie that takes place on a boat, or on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, or in an icy tundra. A similar story but with a new location could be a huge breath of fresh air. But variety in story is also really important. In the television show Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, I think they managed to get very creative and tell some really new and unique stories in simple ways. I really wasn't expecting to like the show as much as I did, and I think the things that I liked about it could be used in future films. And that's honestly all I want. Again, even though I like the repetitive nature of the story, I really do want to see variety in the next film. We've explored repetition, let's try something completely new. We don't need to avoid references or echoes of the past, but I'd like to stop relying on it as much as we have. And either way, I'm really excited to see what the next movie holds. Now, whether you're familiar with the Terminator movies or not, I'm sure you've noticed that this video was a little bit light on the Arnold Schwarzenegger discussion. Well, I actually have a lot to say about Arnold and the various characters he's played in the Terminator franchise. However, I think I'll save that discussion for a future video. Just know that for many reasons, Arnold is the heart of the franchise. I stand firm that the Terminator franchise absolutely can exist without him, but his inclusion in most of the 6 movies and the characters he portrays are absolutely a treat. But again, we'll save that discussion for a future video.
It's been a long day. I don't know what to tell you. I moved out, said goodbye to Kyle, and now I got a new person on my couch. So it's just been a long day. I don't know what else to say. Okay, anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. If for some reason you enjoyed this, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers know, I make a variety of content on my channel, and I'm always gonna make the videos that I wanna make. But if you see something you enjoy, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. I know it's been a while since I've been live, but if you wanna watch me play video games live, check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps. I'm hoping that having this new place and having a new setup will make it easier for me to start streaming again. And all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are at carrotscraps as well. So I want to thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Hey, carrot slurps. Carrot slurps.
Oh, I'm Carrot Slurps. I know a lot about the future. Oh, look at me. Oh, don't do this. Don't do that. I decide, maybe you do what I tell you to.
That's what you sound like. You fish trash.